The judge asked whether my marriage was irretrievably broken, and Julian looked at me as if the correct answer might still be hidden somewhere on my face. We sat at separate tables in a small Allegheny County courtroom, close enough that I could see the pale line where he had removed his wedding ring. 12 years of marriage had been reduced to 2 binders, a parenting plan section marked not applicable, and a list of assets neither of us had fought over. No contested issues remain. My attorney said that was true in the legal sense. The house had sold, the retirement accounts had been divided, Julian had kept his architecture practice, I had kept my equity from the fintech company where I worked. We had agreed that the blue ceramic bowls from our first apartment belonged to me and that his father's drafting table belonged to him. We had been civilized enough to make the ending look painless. The judge repeated the question. I heard myself say, "Yes," Julian answered half a second later. "Yes, Your Honor." The delay hurt more than it should have. The judge signed. A clerk stamped 2 copies. My lawyer touched my elbow and began explaining the 30-day administrative period. But I was watching Julian slide his documents into a worn leather portfolio. His hands were steady until a folded scrap of paper slipped from his wallet and landed near his shoe. I recognized the paper before I recognized the handwriting. It was pale blue, torn from the pad I had used in college. Across the crease in my 19-year-old script were the words, "Meet me under the astronomy dome after your studio review. I choose us. Don't make me say it twice." Julian picked it up too quickly. "You kept that?" I asked. He froze for one brief moment. The guarded man I had lived beside for years disappeared. I saw the scholarship student who used to sleep in the architecture lab, ink on his fingers, too proud to admit he could not afford dinner. "I forgot it was there," he said. We both knew he was lying. The fold lines had softened from being opened and closed. My lawyer had moved toward the door. Julian's attorney was speaking to the clerk. The room continued around us, ordinary and fluorescent, while something inside me cracked open far too late. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. His laugh held no humor. "Which thing, Nora?" "That you still." I stopped. The divorce decree lay between us. Julian pressed the note flat against his portfolio. "You asked me not to make this harder." "I asked you once. You asked me for 2 years without using the words." The answer struck because it was unfair and because it was partly true. I had waited for him to notice that I was lonely. He had waited for me to notice that he was drowning. We had translated silence into rejection and pride into indifference. By the time I filed, our conversations had become negotiations over groceries, work travel, and who had forgotten to call the plumber. At the courthouse doors, Julian stopped beside me. March rain silvered the steps. He opened his umbrella, an old black one with a bent rib, and held it so the water did not touch my coat. "Habit, even at the end, habit." "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" His eyes moved over my face. "I never figured out how to be proud of you without feeling afraid you'd outgrow me." My throat tightened. He went on before I could answer. "And I never told you how bad things were with my mother because I thought you'd fix it. You always fix things. Then I'd owe you. And I didn't want to be another problem on your list. You were my husband, not a problem. I know that now." A car horn sounded at the curb. My lawyer called my name. I wanted to tell Julian that I had envied his work because buildings stayed. I had spent years making other people's software profitable while the best idea I had ever had belonged, publicly, to someone else. I wanted to tell him that when Camille Voss said he needed a wife who understood sacrifice, I had believed the sentence came from him. I wanted to ask whether he had truly spent those late nights at her firm because of the hospital debt, not because he preferred her company. Most of all, I wanted to ask why 2 intelligent people had treated verification as essential at work and optional at home. But regret is eloquent only after the deadline. Julian held out the blue note. "This is yours." I closed his fingers around it. "No, you carried it this far." His mouth moved as if he might say something else, then he nodded once and walked into the rain. I watched until the crowd swallowed him. That evening, I returned to the corporate apartment I had rented after the house sale. The rooms were clean, expensive, and temporary. A bottle of champagne from my attorney waited in the refrigerator with a card that read "To New Beginnings." I left it unopened. Instead, I opened an old storage box labeled WRE. Inside were photographs, a cracked student ID, one of Julian's charcoal sketches, and a red folder I had avoided for years. The folder held press clippings about Paige Lowell. My former roommate had become the celebrated founder of ClearPass, a digital credential company valued at $6 billion. Magazine profiles called her a visionary who had imagined portable identity before the market existed. One article included a photograph of Paige holding a page from an old notebook. The caption described it as, "The handwritten idea that launched a revolution." The handwriting was not visible, but I knew the page. I had written the original concept in October 2010 after a campus financial aid office lost my work-study verification for the third time. I had drawn a crude system where a person could prove one fact: enrollment, income eligibility, a professional license, without surrendering an entire file. I gave the page to Paige because she said she would type it for a student innovation contest. She submitted it under both our names, then told me the judges had rejected it. Years later, when I joined ClearPass as an early product manager, Paige said her concept had grown out of a dozen conversations. I wanted to believe her. I accepted options instead of founder shares and worked until the product matched the system I had once sketched. When the board pushed me out during a reorganization, I signed a severance agreement and told myself I should have documented more. Julian had called the night I was fired. I did not answer because he was in Chicago with Camille's team, presenting a waterfront project. He did not call again. That was how our marriage had died, not from one betrayal, but from hundreds of unverified conclusions. I pulled the article closer on Paige's photograph page. I could make out the corner of a blue university notepad, my notepad. A headache tightened behind my eyes. I remembered the library table where I had written the first version. I remembered Paige leaning over my shoulder. I remembered Julian arriving with 2 vending machine coffees and asking why I looked as if I had discovered a new planet. I had laughed and said, "Maybe I have." The apartment lights flickered for a moment. The glass wall reflected a younger version of me. Thick dark hair twisted into a careless knot. Westbridge sweatshirt, silver star earrings. Julian had one from a claw machine. Then pain cut through my chest so sharply that I dropped the article. I reached for the counter. The room tilted. Somewhere a clock began chiming, though the apartment had no clock that chimed. 1, 2, 3. By the 6th chime I was no longer standing. By the 9th I could smell dust, burnt coffee, and the lemon cleaner used in Westbridge University's old library. By the 12th, I opened my eyes. My cheek rested on an open algorithms textbook. A fluorescent lamp buzzed overhead. Students whispered between tall wooden shelves. Outside the arched windows, maple leaves burned orange against an October sky. I sat up too fast. My hands were smooth. No pale scar crossed my right thumb from the ClearPass server room accident. A silver star earring swung against my neck. On the table lay a campus newspaper dated October 14, 2010. I read the date 3 times. My phone was an old slider model with a cracked plastic case. 7 unread messages waited on the screen. 3 were from Paige. "Did you finish the innovation contest, Paige? I can clean it up for you. Send it before 5 or we'll miss the deadline." My pulse thundered. The page. I searched the table and found a pale blue notepad under my textbook. The top sheet was blank. In my first life, I would write the concept during the next hour. I would hand it to Paige before dinner. I would meet Julian under the astronomy dome that night and begin the relationship that would become both the safest and loneliest place I had ever known. A chair scraped across from me. "Nora?" Julian stood there at 20 years old, rain darkening the shoulders of his thrift store jacket. His hair was too long. His backpack was held together with black tape, and there was a fresh cut across one knuckle. From his model-making knife, he set 2 vending machine coffees on the table. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I had seen one. He was alive, young, and looking at me with the open concern he would later teach himself to hide. For one dangerous second, I wanted to throw my arms around him and beg forgiveness for a future he had not lived. Instead, I gripped the edge of the table. "What time is your studio review?" I asked. 6. Why? Because in my first life I had made love a promise and documentation an afterthought. This time I would reverse the order. I pulled the blue notepad toward me. "I need 1 hour, I said. "Then I need you to witness something." Julian's eyebrows rose. "That sounds either romantic or illegal." "Neither." I picked up my pen. "It's the first honest thing I'm going to build." He did not laugh. That was one of the things I had forgotten about young Julian beneath the teasing. He took my work seriously before anyone else knew there was work to take. Seriously, he pulled out the chair and sat. "Tell me what you need." The familiar sentence nearly undid me. In our first life, I had heard it as an offer to carry everything later. I had resented him whenever he failed to guess which burden I meant. "A witness," I said carefully. "Not a rescuer. Read what I write, ask questions, then watch me send it." His gaze sharpened, curious and a little surprised. "Okay." Outside, the bell tower began the quarter hour. I placed the date at the top of the page, pressed hard enough to mark the sheet beneath it, and began again. I wrote the title first, The Missing Trust Layer. Under it, I drew 3 boxes: the person, the issuer, and the verifier. In 2025, the diagram would have looked elementary. In 2010, most identity systems still assumed that the safest way to prove one fact was to copy an entire record into another company's database. Universities faxed transcripts, licensing boards mailed sealed envelopes, benefits offices asked people to bring folders of documents from one counter to another. Every new verifier created another storehouse of names, addresses, birth dates, and account numbers. I had spent 15 years watching those storehouses become targets. My note proposed something narrower. A trusted issuer would provide a cryptographically signed credential. The user would keep control of it. A verifier could confirm a specific claim without receiving every underlying detail. Credentials could expire, be revoked, and leave an audit trail without creating a permanent map of a person's life. I avoided terms that had not yet become common. I did not write down standards that did not exist. I described the problem in language I could have known in 2010 and the architecture in language I had learned through my own career. Julian read over my shoulder without interrupting. When I finished the first page, he turned the notepad sideways and studied the boxes. So the school says I'm enrolled, he said. But the landlord doesn't get my grades, financial aid, and emergency contact information. Exactly. And if I stop being enrolled, the school revokes the credential. What if the school system goes down? I looked at him. He lifted one shoulder. Buildings need fire exits. Systems probably need them too. In my first life, I had remembered Julian's coffee and forgotten that question. It had taken ClearPass 3 years and one expensive outage to design a reliable revocation cache. I added a margin note. Offline verification window, transparent last updated time, no silent trust. Julian smiled. Do I get equity? You get half a vending machine coffee and my eternal respect. I was hoping for lunch. The ease between us felt dangerous. I knew the shape of his shoulder beneath a winter coat. I knew he would develop a faint line between his brows at 30. I knew which side of the bed he slept on and how he sounded when grief made him quiet. He knew none of that about me. At 4:15 I carried the page to Professor Samuel Ortiz's office. Julian came with me. As promised, Professor Ortiz taught distributed systems and had once reduced a room of overconfident seniors to silence by asking what happened when the network cable was cut. He opened the door wearing a mustard cardigan and holding a grocery receipt. Office hours ended at 4. I know, I said. I need 10 minutes and a timestamp. That earned his attention. His office was crowded with books, obsolete routers, and potted herbs that had not survived the semester. I laid the blue page on his desk and explained the system. He did not praise it. He used the back of the grocery receipt to write 6 attacks against it. Who owns the signing keys? What happens when a person loses the device? How do you prevent a verifier from asking for more than it needs? What stops the issuer from tracking every use? What does revocation reveal? Why should anyone trust you? The last question hit hardest. They shouldn't, I said. Not personally. The design has to make trust inspectable. Professor Ortiz leaned back. Julian stood near the door, silent but alert. Where did this come from? The professor asked. The truthful answer was impossible. It came from a life in which my marriage failed, my work was taken, and millions of people learned to distrust invisible data systems. It came from incidents that had not happened and mistakes I refused to repeat. From losing control of my own records, I said. And from thinking about the difference between proving one fact and surrendering a file. That was also true. Professor Ortiz read the page again. This is not a product, it is a direction, a difficult one. I know. You are a sophomore. I know that too. And you want a timestamp. I want a record that this page exists today in this form and that I wrote it. His eyes narrowed with something like approval. He scanned the page to his university email, copied me and Julian, and wrote, received from Nora Bennett in my office at 4:31 p.m. on October 14, 2010. Julian Reed present. Preliminary discussion only, no ownership determination. Then he walked us to the innovation office downstairs. The coordinator accepted a sealed copy into the student disclosure archive and gave me a receipt number. I photographed the original beside the day's newspaper. I mailed a copy to myself by certified mail, not because the unopened envelope myth created copyright, but because redundant records mattered. I saved the digital scan in 2 accounts and on a flash drive. Julian watched the process with growing amusement. You plan dates like this? He asked as we crossed the quad. I used to plan nothing until it was too late. Used to. I had forgotten how quickly he noticed loose words, figure of speech. My phone buzzed. Paige, where are you? Deadline in 20 minutes. I stopped walking in the first life. Paige and I had sat on the floor of our dorm room that evening, eating noodles from paper cups while she typed my page into the contest form. She had joked that I was the inventor and she was the translator. A week later she told me the submission had disappeared because the website crashed. There had been no crash. This time I opened the contest site myself. The rules were worse than I remembered. Submissions became eligible for university-sponsored commercialization review, and team ownership depended on the names entered at the time of filing. I listed myself as sole author of the concept. I named Professor Ortiz as faculty reviewer, not co-inventor. I attached the scan page and a short disclosure that further work would require separate contributor agreements. Then I pressed submit. A confirmation number appeared at 4:54 p.m. Paige called before I could lock the screen. Please tell me you sent the page, she said without greeting. I submitted it. There was a pause. You did? Yes. Without me? You hadn't contributed to it. Her voice changed by 1 degree, warmth tightening into injury. I was going to help you make it readable. It was readable enough for the submission. Nora, we talked about doing the competition together. We had talked about entering. I had assumed that friendship meant shared credit. Paige had encouraged that assumption because it benefited her. I'm happy to build a team after the concept review, I said. Roles, work, and equity will match actual contributions. Julian glanced at me. The sentence sounded older than 19. Paige laughed softly. Wow, one little idea and you already sound like a lawyer. Documentation prevents resentment, or creates it. She hung up. I expected triumph. Instead, I felt grief. Paige had been my closest friend for years. We had shared clothes, rent, secrets, and later an office in the first life. Even after I understood what she had done, part of me kept searching for a version of events in which she had not meant to take anything. Rebirth had not erased affection. It had only removed my excuse for ignoring evidence. Julian and I reached the path that split toward the architecture building and the astronomy dome. His studio review began in less than an hour. In the first life, I had slipped the blue romantic note into his backpack because I was too nervous to say I wanted our undefined friendship to become something more. He had met me under the dome at midnight, soaked from rain and grinning like a man who had won something. Now he shifted his backpack and said, "You still need me tonight?" The question carried no pressure. That made it harder. I could avoid him. I could decide that the safest way to protect my future was never to enter the marriage that had broken us. For 16 years, I had confused avoiding pain with making a wise choice. I need to change the plan, I said. His expression closed slightly. Okay. Not anger, preparation for disappointment. I understood then that Julian's pride had not appeared in our 30s, it was already here, built from years of accepting help that arrived wrapped in pity. I'm not canceling, I said. I'm asking you to meet me after your review because you want to, not because I've written a dramatic note and created an obligation. His mouth twitched. Was there going to be a dramatic note? In another version of tonight. And what did it say? I looked toward the dome above the trees, something about choosing us. The humor left his face. Do you? I could not promise marriage. I could not promise that love would survive knowledge of a future. Only I remembered I could promise not to manipulate him with grief he had not caused. I choose to find out who we are when we tell each other the truth, I said. Julian considered that. That is the least romantic answer I've ever liked. Meet me at 10:30. My review will run late. In the first life, I had waited from 9, furious and frightened by the time he arrived. Text me if it changes, I said. I will. He took 3 steps, then turned back. Nora, yes. Whatever that page becomes, don't let anyone convince you it was obvious after you built it. The words landed with the force of prophecy. At 10:28, Julian appeared beneath the astronomy dome carrying 2 paper cups and a paper bag of sandwiches he could not afford. He had texted twice, once when the review started late, once when it ended. I had spent the intervening hours opening a new project folder, naming every file with a date, and writing the first rule of my second life. Love deserves trust, work deserves proof. Neither survives on assumption. We ate beneath the old brass telescope while rain tapped the dome. Julian told me his review had gone badly because he had designed a community library with too much unprogrammed space. His critic called it inefficient. Julian called it room for people to become something no planner had predicted. In the first life, I had loved that answer and later accused him of being impractical whenever money frightened me. This matters to you, I said. He looked surprised by the certainty in my voice. Yes. Then don't trade it away just because someone with a better coat tells you ambition has one shape. Is that advice for me or you? Both? He raised his coffee in a small toast to difficult directions. I touched my cup to his this time when his hand found mine on the cold bench. I did not mistake the beginning for a guarantee. I let it be what it was, a choice made honestly, with no ownership implied. Professor Ortiz rejected my first prototype proposal in 48 hours. He returned it covered in comments and one sentence across the top. You have described a future company build. One useful transaction in my first life. Criticism from someone I respected had always triggered one of two reactions. I either worked until I could present something flawless, or I quietly abandoned the idea before anyone could reject me twice. This time I walked back into his office. What counts as one useful transaction? I asked. He handed me a grocery receipt. I almost laughed. You really do carry those everywhere. A receipt tells a small verifiable story, a buyer, a seller, a time and amount. Your system wants to tell a smaller story than a transcript or a financial aid file. Find the smallest story someone urgently needs. Westbridge's Student Employment Office provided the answer. Every semester, hundreds of students had to prove current enrollment and work-study eligibility to campus departments. The office emailed spreadsheets containing far more information than supervisors needed. Mistakes delayed paychecks. Students lined up with paper forms. Staff retyped the same data into 3 systems. I proposed a pilot that would verify only 3 claims: currently enrolled, eligible for work study, and authorized for a maximum number of weekly hours. The director, Elaine Foster, listened with the patience administrators reserve for students who have not yet learned how many rules exist. No one is replacing our payroll system, she said. I'm not asking to. No one is storing student records on personal phones. I'm not asking that either. No production data leaves the university. Agreed. She stopped, mildly disappointed that I had not argued. I showed her a paper mock-up. The student office issued a signed token containing only the 3 approved claims and an expiration date. A supervisor could verify the token through a campus page. For the pilot, we would use synthetic records and 20 volunteers. Nothing would touch payroll. Elaine tapped the page. And who supports this when you graduate? That is part of the pilot decision. If it cannot be transferred, documented, and audited, it does not move forward. Those were Maya Chen's words. I met Maya at a student legal clinic workshop about intellectual property. She sat in the front row with a red fountain pen and interrupted a visiting attorney who described privacy as mostly a consumer communications issue. Privacy is allocation of risk, she said. The company gets the benefit. Who carries the harm when the system is wrong? After the workshop, I asked her to review the contest rules. She read my disclosure, Professor Ortiz's email, and the archive receipt. Then she wrote in red ink at the top of my page, who owns the risk? You documented authorship, she said. Good, you have not documented what happens when other people contribute. Bad. I haven't recruited anyone yet. You have a professor advising you and a boyfriend asking system design questions. Julian is not my boyfriend. Maya looked toward the hallway, where Julian was waiting with a cardboard model under one arm and 3 coffees in a tray. Does he know that? We made it official that weekend, though official consisted of Julian asking whether he could call me his girlfriend and me saying yes after an embarrassing pause. The business team formed more slowly. Professor Ortiz agreed to supervise the technical work under the university's student innovation policy. Maya drafted a simple contribution agreement through the clinic, reviewed by its licensed attorney. It identified pre-existing work, assigned project code to a future entity if we incorporated, and promised that equity discussions would follow documented contribution rather than friendship or seniority. Julian signed a witness statement for the original page but declined any ownership. I asked one useful question, he said. If that earns shares, your cap table is going to look like a raffle. Paige did not find it funny. She had avoided me for 2 weeks, then arrived at the library with pastries and an apology. I overreacted, she said. I was excited about doing something together. Part of me wanted to accept the version of her I remembered from our best nights, Paige dancing barefoot in the dorm hallway, Paige lending me her last $20, Paige sitting beside me after my father missed another birthday call. People are rarely only the worst thing they do. That did not mean I had to give them access to repeat it. We can still work together, I said. There's a user research role, interviews, process maps, consent language. Maya has the contributor form. Paige's smile held. You want me to sign a contract to help with a class project? It isn't a class project. It's 1 page and some mock-ups. Then the form should not worry you. She glanced at Julian, who was trimming foam board at the next table. Does he have to sign one? He isn't contributing. Convenient. Julian set down his knife. Paige. I touched his wrist before he could continue. In the first life, he had defended me often. I had loved the rush of it. Over time, I had also let his defense become a substitute for my own voice. This is my decision, I said. You can join under the same terms as everyone else, or you can decline. Our friendship does not depend on it. Paige looked at me as if I had broken an unspoken rule. That was exactly what I had done. She signed the form. For 3 weeks, we worked well. Paige was excellent in interviews. She noticed when students lied to avoid embarrassment. She could turn a tense meeting into a conversation. Her notes helped us understand that users feared not only data theft but also bureaucratic punishment. A student who lost eligibility wanted to know whether an employer would see the reason. A supervisor wanted proof that could not be copied from someone else's screen. I began to wonder whether documentation could save our friendship as well as my work. Then Maya found Paige's private pitch deck. It was open on a library computer after Paige left for class. The title read Trustport, the identity layer for every transaction. 3 sentences came directly from my blue page. The final slide listed Paige as founder and me as technical lead pending. Maya did not touch the keyboard. She photographed the screen with the clock visible and called me. My hands went cold when I saw it. Paige returned 20 minutes later. She stopped at the end of the table, taking in our faces. You opened my files. You left the deck displayed on a public computer, Maya said. We did not access anything else. Paige looked at me. It's for a business club exercise. You used my language. Our language. I interviewed people. The copied sections predate your interviews. Her cheeks flushed. This is why nobody can work with you now. You're acting like every sentence is a crime scene. No, I said. I'm acting like credit is specific. You think because you drew 3 boxes you own digital identity. I own my page. The project owns work assigned to it. You own your interview notes until the agreement transfers them. General ideas are not property, specific text and code are. Maya had drilled that distinction into me. Paige shut the laptop. Fine, I'm out. We'll document your departure and preserve your credited work, I said. Her eyes shone. For an instant I saw genuine hurt beneath the anger. You already decided I would betray you. The accusation followed me for days because it contained a truth I did not like. I had watched Paige more closely than anyone else. I had interpreted every question through knowledge of what she would one day do. Even when she contributed well, I had not considered trusting her again. Julian found me in the architecture workshop after midnight, sitting on the floor between stacks of basswood. You missed dinner, he said. I texted. You texted, don't wait. That isn't the same as saying you're upset and want space. I looked up sharply. He leaned against a work table. I'm trying to understand the rules. The old Nora would have heard criticism and defended her efficiency. The future Nora had spent years wishing he had asked one more question. I'm angry at Paige, I said. And I'm afraid I used the future version of her to judge the present one. Julian was quiet. You don't have to understand that sentence, I added. I don't, but I understand being so sure someone will leave that you make them prove they won't. His father had left when Julian was 12. I knew the story, but in my first life I had treated it as history rather than an active wound. I don't want to do that to you, I said. Then don't assign me a part without telling me. What part? The loyal witness, the guy who brings coffee and never needs anything. The accuracy stung. What do you need? I asked. Tonight, for you to come see my housing model before I destroy it because one critic called it sentimental. I stood. We spent the next hour moving tiny cardboard walls. Julian explained how a shared courtyard could reduce isolation without forcing intimacy. I told him the stairwell was too narrow. He told me my software diagram looked like a depressed spider. We argued, we laughed. Neither of us rescued the other. The next morning, I documented Paige's exit, paid her a small stipend from the contest grant for completed interviews, and retained the notes under the signed agreement. She refused the check twice, then cashed it. A week later, Professor Ortiz called our team into his office. The Student Innovation Committee had selected our proposal for a $5,000 prototype award. He placed the grocery receipt from our first meeting beside the blue page. One useful transaction. He reminded me. I looked at Maya, at Julian, and at the empty chair Paige had occupied. The company that would one day make me a billionaire did not begin with applause. It began with a narrow pilot, a documented departure, and the uncomfortable discovery that protecting my work would not excuse me from examining how fear shaped my treatment of people. That night, I created the project repository. The first file was the scan note, the second was a contributor log, the third was a plain text document titled Assumptions to Test. At the top, I wrote, "The most dangerous unverified assumption is that good intentions produce good outcomes." Julian read the sentence from behind me. "Does that apply to relationships too?" he asked. "Especially relationships." He nodded toward the screen. "Then add another assumption." I waited. "That asking for reassurance makes you weak." I typed it beneath the first line. He hesitated before continuing. "And that being needed is the same as being loved." That one was mine. We both knew it. I typed it anyway. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence. In the life I remembered, we had not named either belief until a courthouse had already converted our marriage into paperwork. Here, in a cold lab with a $5,000 grant and no guarantee of anything, we had at least made the hidden architecture visible. Julian rested his chin briefly against my hair. "No silent trust," he said, borrowing my margin note. "No silent trust." I agreed. Our first live demonstration failed in front of 40 people. The Student Employment Office had invited department supervisors, payroll staff, 2 university lawyers, and a vice provost who checked his watch every 90 seconds. We had tested the system for 3 weeks using synthetic records. The volunteers had practiced. The verification page had worked through every simulated outage Professor Ortiz could invent. Then Elaine Foster scanned the first student's code, and the screen displayed credential status unknown, contact issuer. The room went still. I refreshed the page, same message. The second volunteer tried, unknown. A supervisor in the front row said, "So this is faster than a paper form." Someone laughed. Heat climbed my neck, but embarrassment was not the real danger. A failed student demo could be forgiven. A system that displayed an incorrect eligible result could not. Our design had chosen uncertainty over a false positive. That was the right failure mode, even if it looked terrible on a projector. "Please pause the demonstration," I said. "No eligibility decision should be made from the system until we identify the cause." The vice provost stood. "I have another meeting. We'll send a written incident report by tomorrow." He left without answering. Elaine folded her arms. "You assured me this had been tested." "It was. Something changed between the final test and this session." That is what people say when a system fails. Professor Ortiz did not intervene. Maya sat beside the university council, already writing times and actions in red ink. Julian stood near the back wall holding the display board he had designed for us. I wanted him to cross the room. I wanted him to tell everyone I was brilliant and that one failure meant nothing. He stayed where he was. At first, the old ache of abandonment rose in me. Then I understood this was my work. Public defense before diagnosis would turn loyalty into theater. I closed the presentation. "The safest next step is to stop. We will preserve logs, identify whether the fault is in issuance, verification, or connectivity, and report what happened. I'm sorry for wasting your time." The room emptied quickly. In the hallway, Paige waited beside a campus news reporter. She had joined the business club after leaving our project and had apparently heard about the demonstration. Her expression was composed, almost sympathetic. "Nora," she said, "I'm sorry, that looked brutal." The reporter lifted a recorder. "Is it true the prototype could mislabel students' financial aid status?" "No," I said. "It failed." Closed. It returned no status. We paused before anyone used it for a decision. "So it doesn't work." "It did not work in that session. We're investigating why." Paige touched the reporter's arm. "What Nora means is that the concept is still early. Some of us raised concerns about trying to commercialize before the technology was ready. Some of us," she was placing herself inside the history while distancing herself from the failure. "I could have told the reporter about her pitch deck. I could have produced the photograph and made the story about attempted appropriation. The evidence was real, but using it as retaliation would not explain our outage. Our former contributor did not work on the current prototype," I said. "The team responsible for today's system is named in the public project record. We'll publish the incident findings there." Paige's smile disappeared. The reporter asked whether I would resign from the project. "No." That answer became the headline. "Student founder refuses TO step down after failed identity demo by dinner." The article had spread through campus forums. Comments called the project dangerous, arrogant, and unnecessary. One student wrote that a woman who could not make a QR code work should not have access to anyone's records. We did not have access to anyone's records. But accuracy had already lost to a better insult. In the lab, Maya created a timeline. Professor Ortiz copied the server logs to read-only storage. I compared the signing service configuration against the tested version. At 2:13 a.m. we found the change. The university's central IT vendor had rotated a test certificate that morning without notifying the pilot team. Our verifier correctly rejected credentials signed under the new certificate because the trust registry had not been updated. The vendor's integration guide promised automated notice. But the test environment did not have that feature enabled. It was not sabotage, it was a dependency failure we should have anticipated. Professor Ortiz pointed to the grocery receipt taped above my monitor. Who owned the risk? We did, I said. Even if the vendor caused the change, Maya nodded. Then the report says both things, root cause and design responsibility. We worked until dawn. The incident report included the logs, certificate, history, impact assessment, corrective actions, and a plain statement that no real student data had been exposed or incorrectly verified. We added monitoring for certificate changes, a manual update process, and a visible last synchronized time. Elaine read the report in silence. You make yourselves look careless, she said. We were careless about one dependency, I answered. Hiding that would make us unsafe. The University Council asked whether the report would be public. Yes. That increases liability. Maya leaned forward. It also creates an accurate record before rumors become the only record. The council looked at her. Are you licensed? Not yet. I can tell. He approved a revised statement anyway. The vice provost canceled the pilot for the semester. We lost access to the employment office and half our remaining grant funds. The Innovation Committee scheduled a review to determine whether the project should continue. That afternoon, I found Julian outside the architecture building. He had not slept. His studio model sat under plastic because rain had started again. You didn't come to the lab, I said. You had 6 technical people in there and no food. I brought sandwiches at midnight. Maya told me not to interrupt. I didn't see them. You ate one without looking up. I remembered a sandwich appearing beside my keyboard. The first life version of this conversation would have become a fight. I would have accused him of not showing up in the form I expected. He would have listed the things he had done invisibly, then regretted listing them. I wanted you to defend me, I admitted, against the reporter. Against everyone. Julian set down the model. I almost did. Why didn't you? Because you weren't being accused of being a bad person, you were being asked whether the system worked. I don't know enough to answer that. The distinction was clean and painful. He stepped closer. But I should have asked what you needed after. I assumed you wanted space because you always look more capable when you're hurt. I look capable because I'm trying not to need anyone. I know. No, you don't. The words came out sharper than I intended. You can't know things I don't say. He waited. I need you to sit with me for an hour, I said. No fixing, no telling me the project will succeed. I need to be disappointed without turning it into a plan. Okay. We sat on the concrete steps beneath the building overhang. Students passed us. Rain bounced off the courtyard. For 10 minutes I said nothing. Julian did not fill the silence. Then I told him how humiliating it felt to have Paige waiting with a reporter. I told him I feared the committee would end the project before it became real. I did not tell him that I had already seen a version of the company worth billions. That future was not guaranteed now. Every changed choice altered the path. When I finished, Julian said, "Do you want my opinion?" Yes. The failure probably saved you. I stared at him. If it had worked, everyone would have admired the smooth screen and ignored the dependency. Now your system has a visible scar. Buildings get safer after people understand where they crack. That is an architect's way of making disaster sound expensive but noble. It usually is expensive. I laughed despite myself. The review committee met 3 days later. Paige attended as a student observer. The campus reporter sat in the last row. I did not present a defense of my intelligence. I presented the incident timeline, the missing vendor notification, our responsibility for failing to monitor the certificate, and the revised architecture. I showed that the system had rejected an unverifiable credential rather than guessing. Then Elaine Foster surprised me. The students handled the failure better than several vendors we pay, she said. I recommend a smaller pilot under direct university control. The committee restored $3,000 and authorized 10 volunteer transactions in a closed environment. It was not victory, it was permission to continue. Outside the meeting room, the reporter approached Julian before reaching me. You're Nora Bennett's boyfriend, right? Do you think the university is taking a risk by letting her continue? Julian looked toward me. He could have given the protective answer people expected. Instead, he said, yes, building anything new creates risk. Nora's the person I trust to name the risk accurately, including when it belongs to her. The quote ran the next day beneath a corrected article about the certificate failure. Paige sent me one message. You always did know how to turn mistakes into publicity. I saved it in the project archive and did not reply. The closed pilot began 2 weeks later. 10 students verified 30 claims. Every result matched the source record. The process saved an average of 11 minutes per transaction. Too little to build a company on and enough to prove one useful thing. Professor Ortiz wrote the number on the back of a grocery receipt. Now, he said, find a problem worth surviving. Another failure 4. Julian met me under the astronomy dome that night. He brought no grand speech, only a new umbrella and a question. What do you need? I answered before habit could answer for me. Dinner, sleep, then work. He took my hand, in that order. For once, we walked to a 24-hour diner off campus. Julian ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and tried to pretend he was not counting the bills in his wallet. In my first life, I had paid without asking and later wondered why he seemed ashamed. This time I suggested we split pancakes and used a coupon from the student paper. He noticed. You don't have to manage my pride, he said. I'm trying to make dinner affordable for both of us. The answer relaxed something in his face. Over coffee, we made an agreement that had nothing to do with romance. When either of us wanted help, we would ask for the specific form: money, time, listening, advice, or action. No tests, no noble refusals followed by resentment. Julian wrote the 5 words on a napkin. Should we archive this too? He asked. I folded it into my wallet. Some evidence is allowed to be private. By spring 2012, the project had a name, a license agreement, and exactly $912 in the bank. We called it North Star Identity because Professor Ortiz rejected every name containing trust, secure, or universal. If you must announce that a system is trustworthy, he said, it probably is not. The university licensed the student-created code to our new company in exchange for a small equity stake and reimbursement of future patent expenses. The agreement took 4 months, 3 revisions, and 1 meeting where I learned that a university could congratulate you for entrepreneurship while asking for rights broad enough to frighten every investor. Maya negotiated from the student side under clinic supervision. Professor Ortiz disclosed his advisory role and accepted restricted founder shares subject to vesting. I held the largest stake, but not the absolute control I had imagined in my first rush of fear. Maya insisted on a board seat reserved for an independent director after our first priced round. You are building a company, not a bunker, she said. Julian designed our logo on tracing paper and refused payment until we could afford his regular student rate. I paid him anyway from the first small contract. North Star's initial customer was not glamorous. A regional nursing association needed a faster way. 4 hospitals to confirm continuing education status without receiving full course histories. We built a narrow credential, ran a 6-month audit, and invoiced $12,000. I framed the first paid invoice the same week. Julian received an offer from the Calder Urban Fellowship in Chicago. He brought the letter to my apartment and placed it beside the invoice. The fellowship was one of the best early career programs in the country. It paid a modest salary, covered licensure support, and assigned fellows to public housing and adaptive reuse projects. In my first life, Julian had declined it. He had told me he wanted to stay near Westbridge while I finished school. I had accepted the sacrifice as proof of love, then spent years afraid he secretly blamed me later. When Camille Voss offered him a senior role at her father's firm, he took it with the hunger of someone trying to recover a road he had closed. You should go, I said. Julian's expression tightened. That was fast. It's right for your work. That isn't what I asked. What did you ask? Nothing yet. I brought you the letter. I sat on the edge of the couch. My instinct was to solve the future. Chicago would create distance. Camille, also selected for the fellowship, would be there. North Star would demand more time. Every first life fear stood in the room with us. What do you want? I asked. To go? Then go. His jaw moved. Do you want to try long distance? Yes. Because you love me or because you've decided this is the correct strategic choice? The question embarrassed me because I had spent 15 minutes speaking like a board memo. Both, I said. I love you. I also don't want either of us to build a career around a sacrifice the other person did not request. Julian looked at the fellowship letter. I'm afraid you'll discover life is easier without me. I could have promised that would never happen. It would have sounded romantic and meant nothing. You may discover parts of life that are easier without me, I said. I may discover the same. Easier is not the only measure. He was quiet for a long time. See, I added. Least romantic answer you've ever liked. His smile arrived slowly, still holding the record. We made rules on the back of the fellowship letter: 2 scheduled calls each week, 1 visit each month if money allowed, no expectation of immediate replies during studio reviews or product incidents, no using public photographs as evidence of private behavior, ask before assuming. The final rule was Julian's: do not say fine when the accurate word is hurt. Chicago tested every rule. Julian worked 70-hour weeks restoring a former school into mixed-income housing. I finished my degree, raised a small pre-seed round from local angels, and moved North Star into 2 rooms above a dental office. Maya delayed a corporate law job to join full-time after graduation. Professor Ortiz took a leave for 1 semester to help us rebuild the credential service. Our calls were often interrupted, our visits were sometimes canceled. We learned that explicit agreements did not prevent disappointment, they only made it harder to disguise disappointment as moral superiority. Then Camille Voss entered the space between us. I already knew her face from the first life, blonde hair cut at the jaw, expensive restraint, and the stillness of someone raised in rooms where other people waited for her opinion. In Chicago, she and Julian were assigned to the same project team. The first photograph appeared on the fellowship website. They stood over a model, shoulders touching. Camille's hand rested on Julian's arm. My body reacted before my mind did. I was back in our first marriage, opening a magazine profile that called them architecture's most compelling partnership. I remembered Camille at a gala telling me with false kindness, Julian needs someone who understands what his work costs. In 2012, none of that had happened. I called Julian. He answered from a stairwell, "Is everything okay?" I saw the fellowship photo. A pause. "Okay. Camille's hand is on your arm." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you asking if we're involved?" "Yes." "No." I waited for shame to arrive. Instead, relief did. "Do you want context?" He asked. "Yes." The photographer kept moving us closer. Camille grabbed my sleeve because I was stepping off the platform. She flirts when it gives her control of a room. I told her I'm not interested. "Did you tell her you're in a relationship?" "On the first day." "Thank you," he exhaled. "Are you hurt?" I'm frightened by how quickly I believed the image. "That isn't the same question." I closed my eyes. "Yes, I'm hurt that your life there looks complete without me." His voice softened. "It isn't complete, it is full. Those are different." We stayed on the phone until his break ended. 2 days later, Camille emailed me. "Julian says your little credential project is taking off. He worries you'll resent the compromises his career requires." I told him, ambitious couples need to be realistic in the first life. I would have read the email 3 times, heard Julian's supposed worry as accusation, and replied politely while storing the wound. This time, I forwarded it to him with 1 line. "Did you say this?" He called within 5 minutes. "No, I said I worry distance will turn every compromise into evidence we don't care." "Did she know you meant both of us?" "Yes." "Then answer her yourself." He copied me on his reply. "Camille, you misstated a private conversation. Do not contact Nora to interpret my concerns. If I need to discuss our relationship, I will do it directly. Keep future communication about the fellowship project." Camille responded with a brief apology. She did not touch him in public photographs again. It should have felt like a complete victory over the first life triangle. Instead, a different problem emerged. I began using transparency as surveillance. I asked Julian for project schedules, guest lists, and names of people at dinners. I framed the questions as practical planning. He answered for several weeks. Then, during a visit to Westbridge, he placed his phone on my kitchen table. "You can read every message," he said. I stared at it. "I didn't ask to." "You ask around it. That isn't fair." "No, it isn't. You verify me like a system under audit, then call it communication." Anger rose because he was right. I have reasons to be cautious. Reasons you won't explain. I looked away. Julian had accepted my strange flashes of certainty, my knowledge of processes I had never formally encountered, and my occasional grief over events that had not happened. He had stopped asking after I told him I was not ready. His patience did not erase his right to boundaries. "I don't want your phone," I said. "What do you want?" "Control over whether I can be surprised." "That is not something I can give you." The sentence was gentle. It still hurt. I pushed the phone back. "You shouldn't have to prove innocence every week. And you shouldn't have to pretend you're not scared, but I need you to tell me the fear, not turn me into a defendant." We revised our rules. No access to devices as reassurance. Disclose meaningful boundary violations. Not every social interaction. Ask direct questions. Accept that trust contains uncertainty. The next month, North Star won a contract to test professional license verification with 2 hospital systems. The contract was worth $180,000, enough to hire 4 engineers and move out of the dental office. I called Julian from the empty new space. "We did it," I said. He cheered so loudly that a construction worker looked through the doorway. Then Julian told me his fellowship had offered a second year. In my first life, I would have heard the timing as competition. This time, I sat on the dusty floor and asked, "Do you want it?" "Yes." "Then we have 2 good things and 1 hard thing." "What's the hard thing?" "Missing you." He was silent for a moment. Accurate word. he asked, accurate word. We'll figure out what it costs, he said. And we'll decide whether the cost is still worth paying. Not forever, not no matter what. An honest promise had conditions because human beings had limits. I looked at the framed first invoice leaning against the wall and the blue note locked in a fireproof file box. North Star was becoming real. So was the possibility that Julian and I could love each other without demanding that love eliminate distance. Jealousy, ambition, or fear, the test would not be whether those things appeared. The test would be what we did after they did. Before Julian returned to Chicago, he helped me hang the North Star sign. The letters were inexpensive acrylic and the final R leaned slightly because the wall was not level. I reached for the drill to fix it. Julian caught my hand. Leave one thing imperfect for 24 hours. That is an arbitrary rule. It is a medical intervention. You are not a doctor. I am. Treating a serious condition. I left the letter crooked. The next morning, no investor withdrew, no client canceled. The company continued to exist. I sent Julian a photograph as proof. He replied with a photograph of his housing project's unfinished courtyard. Workers had chalked future doorways across bare concrete. Room for people to become something the planner did not predict. He wrote, for the first time, I understood that our distance was not an empty space threatening to swallow us. It was also a courtyard. The question was whether we would build doors into it or walls around it. North Star nearly ran out of money in November 2013, 3 days before Thanksgiving. Our hospital pilot worked, but sales moved slowly. Every legal department wanted security reviews, insurance certificates, and proof that another institution had already taken the risk. We had hired for a rollout that one hospital delayed by 6 months. Payroll was due in 18 days. A Boston venture fund offered a lifeline, $2 million in seed financing, enough for 24 months if we remain disciplined. The term sheet also gave the fund a board seat, broad veto rights, and the power to force a sale after 5 years. Maya circled the force sale clause in red. This is not market standard for a seed round, she said. It is still money. It is money that can sell your mission when the investors get tired. We have 18 days. Professor Ortiz wanted us to ask existing angels for a bridge. Maya wanted to cut expansion and renegotiate the hospital timeline. I wanted the certainty of a signed check. In my first life, ClearPass had raised quickly and celebrated every round as proof of destiny. I had seen the company later change its privacy promises when investors demanded faster growth. I knew better. Yet fear compressed my memory until only one lesson remained. Money buys survival. For 6 days, I worked almost without sleep. Julian called Tuesday evening. I declined the call and texted, board prep call tomorrow. He replied, Mom is at Mercy Hospital. I need to talk. I saw the message while an investor was explaining liquidation preferences. I wrote, is she stable? Yes, they're running tests. I typed, I'll call after this meeting. Then put the phone face down. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Afterward, the lead investor invited me to dinner with 2 partners who had flown in from Boston. Leaving would have weakened our position. Staying felt like proof that I was serious. I texted Julian from the restaurant. Bathroom, I'm sorry, still in negotiations. Please update me. He did not reply. At 2 in the morning, Maya found me revising the term sheet alone in the office. Go home, she said. I need a counterproposal by 8. You need judgment by 8. Sleep is part of judgment. I kept typing. She closed my laptop. I looked up, furious. Do not do that again. Then stop treating everyone's concern as interference. This company employs 8 people. And you are about to accept a clause you would have called predatory last month. We may not have a next month. Maya's expression softened, which made me angrier. You are acting like the frightened version of yourself is the only competent one, she said. I opened the laptop again. At dawn, Julian called. His mother had suffered chest pain caused by a treatable arrhythmia. She needed a catheter ablation, usually effective and far less dangerous than the heart failure I remembered from the first timeline. In that life, Julian had hidden roses. Worsening condition until she collapsed. By then, medical debt and missed work had become a crisis. This time, he had gone with her at the first warning. I'm glad she's stable, I said. I can come this afternoon. We're in Pittsburgh. You're 3 miles away. I closed my eyes. Julian, I asked you to call. I was negotiating payroll. I know. The company could fail. My mother was in the hospital. She was stable. The instant the words left my mouth, I heard how they sounded. Julian was silent. I'm sorry, I said. That was cruel. No, it was efficient. Please don't do that. Do what? Turn one sentence into the whole truth. A tired laugh came through the phone. That is what you did. Stable became not urgent became optional. He was right again, and this time acknowledgement did not repair the injury. I went to the hospital. Rosa sat upright in bed, arranging sugar packets on her tray to calculate what her insurance might cover. She smiled when she saw me. "Tell him I'm not dying," she said. Julian stood by the window, arms folded. "I know," I said. "That doesn't mean he wasn't scared." Rosa looked between us and quietly turned her attention to the packets in the hallway. Julian said, "I don't need you to fix the bill." I didn't offer. "You came with a folder." The folder contained insurance questions, hospital financial assistance forms, and a list of cardiologists. I had built it on the drive over. I didn't know what else to do. "You could have come without a plan. I'm here." After the negotiation dinner, his voice remained low, which made every word precise. I wanted to explain the payroll numbers. I wanted to tell him that in another life, I had watched his mother's illness become a secret wall inside our marriage. I wanted credit for changing the outcome by asking questions earlier. Instead, I said, "You needed me and I chose work." Yes, I had reasons. I know. They don't erase what it did. No, we stood beneath the hospital's bright hallway lights, two people refusing the comfort of a simpler accusation. Julian looked exhausted. "I love you. I also don't trust that there will ever be room for my needs unless they arrive on your schedule." The words entered the deepest wound in me, the belief that usefulness was the price of belonging. My first impulse was to prove him wrong by becoming more useful. "I don't know how to change that quickly," I said. "I don't want a quick promise." "What do you want?" "A break." The hallway seemed to narrow. In the first life, we had stayed together through every fracture. We called endurance commitment and used the marriage certificate to avoid deciding whether our way of loving was still humane. "How long?" I asked. 3 months, no romantic expectations, one scheduled call a week because I don't want us to punish each other with silence. We decide again in February. He had thought about it. That hurt. 2. Are you seeing someone else? No. Camille. No. His face hardened. Do not make her the reason for a problem we created. I looked down. You're right. I wish that made this easier. So do I. We did not kiss goodbye. Julian returned to Rosa's room. I sat in the hospital cafeteria until Maya called about the investor deadline. For the first time in my second life, I wanted to abandon the company, not sell it, not pause, destroy it before it could cost me Julian again. The thought revealed how little I had changed. I still imagined love and work as competing owners of the same person. If one caused pain, the other had to be sacrificed. I returned to the office and told the team the truth. "I am not in a condition to make this financing decision alone," I said. "Maya, lead the counterproposal. Professor Ortiz, contact the existing angels. I will handle the operating cuts." Delegating felt less like relief than falling backward. Maya reopened her laptop. "Good, first cut is the expansion office." I signed the lease. "With a termination option you insisted on because you planned for uncertainty." I had forgotten we gave up half the space, delayed 2 hires, and asked our angels for a 6-month convertible bridge. 3 agreed, 1 declined. The hospital advanced part of its implementation payment after we offered a narrower milestone schedule. The Boston Fund removed the forced sale clause but refused our governance counteroffer. We walked away. Payroll cleared with 4 days to spare. No magazine wrote about it. There was no triumphant photograph. North Star survived because Maya challenged me. Professor Ortiz called people who trusted him. The team accepted a smaller plan, and I stopped confusing unilateral control with leadership. My weekly calls with Julian were harder. We limited them to 30 minutes. We discussed Rose's recovery, his Chicago project, North Star's bridge, and ordinary things. We did not say, "I miss you." Until the 4th week, he said it first. "I miss you too," I answered. Neither of us used longing as evidence that the break was a mistake. At Christmas, I visited Rosa while Julian was at the pharmacy. She lined sugar packets across her kitchen table and made me calculate the cost of her new medications. "You two think pain becomes noble when you organize it," she said. "We're trying not to repeat old patterns." "What old patterns? You're 22. I nearly laughed. Rosa pushed a packet toward me. "Julian believes asking is begging. You believe giving is the same as staying. Both of you need new hobbies." When Julian returned, I left before dinner. He walked me to my car. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wanted to. That matters." Snow gathered in his hair. I wanted to touch it. I kept my hands in my coat pockets. "February," he said. "February." On the drive home, I cried for the marriage we had lost and the relationship we might still lose. The tears did not mean I had chosen wrong. Sometimes growth felt less like becoming stronger and more like refusing to use love as anesthesia. February arrived without a Revelation, we met at the diner where we had once written our categories of help on a napkin. The waitress poured coffee, called us Han, and left 2 menus even though we both ordered the same pancakes every time. Julian looked older than he had 3 months earlier, not in his face, in the way he occupied the booth without apologizing for the space. I started counseling through the fellowship, he said. 6 sessions. I had not expected that, in our first marriage, he had refused couples counseling twice, saying we could solve our own problems. What made you go? My mother told me secrecy was not a personality. That sounds like Rosa. What did you do? He asked. I gave Maya authority to stop a contract if compliance risks exceed the threshold we agreed on. I also took Sundays off for 7 weeks. Did the company collapse? Only twice, both times it recovered by Monday. He smiled, then grew serious. Do you want to start again? Every part of me wanted yes. The honest answer contained more. I want to keep learning how, I said. I don't want to pretend 3 months fixed us. Same. So what does starting mean? 1 date a month when I'm here, the weekly calls continue, no exclusivity until we both choose it again. No punishments if one of us decides this is not enough. The terms sounded cautious, almost clinical. They were also kinder than the grand promises we had once made without understanding ourselves. I reached across the table. He met my hand. Halfway, we did not become a couple again that morning. We became 2 people willing to test whether love could survive without ownership. Outside, Julian opened his umbrella over both of us. The bent rib had finally broken, and rain leaked through the gap. We need a new one, I said. We? I looked at him. He squeezed my hand. Accurate word. Hopeful word. Northstar's first regulatory suspension arrived in a plain email on a Monday morning. The Pennsylvania Nursing Board had discovered that one hospital supervisor had used our verification dashboard to search credentials without a documented hiring purpose. No records were altered, no unauthorized person gained access. The supervisor had valid credentials and had past training. The problem was that our system made curiosity too easy. The board suspended the pilot pending review. Our contract allowed termination for privacy control failures. If the hospital ended the agreement, our bridge financing would last 4 months. I read the email twice, then called Maya. She arrived with her red pen, Professor Ortiz with a grocery receipt, and our lead engineer Luis Alvarez, carrying a laptop and the expression of a man who expected to be fired. I built the search filter, he said. I should have required a case number. We approved the design, I said. No one person owns this failure. The sentence was easy to say and difficult to practice. I wanted a name, a fix, and a clean boundary around the damage. Shared responsibility. Felt dangerously close to no responsibility. Maya wrote one question on the whiteboard. What did the system permit that the policy forbade? The answer was simple. Policy required a legitimate employment purpose. The software relied on training and post-use audit. It did not require the verifier to declare a purpose before searching. We had treated misuse as a people problem instead of a product design problem. Professor Ortiz tapped the board. The first page said the verifier should ask only for what it needs. You designed a way to ask for everyone. The criticism cut because the blue note had become almost sacred to me. I had used it as proof of vision. Now it was evidence that I had violated my own principle. We suspend all search access today, I said. Not just the nursing board pilot, every customer. Luis looked alarmed. That will break 3 implementations. It will stop the same misuse from happening elsewhere. Maya nodded. We notify customers before they discover it. Independently. For the next 72 hours, Northstar operated in crisis mode. We disabled broad search, required case-linked requests, added approval thresholds, and designed reports that allowed an individual to see which organizations had verified a credential. We retained an outside privacy auditor and offered the nursing board full log access under confidentiality. I drafted the customer notice myself. Maya crossed out the first paragraph. You wrote isolated misuse, she said. It was. One supervisor. The behavior was isolated, the control weakness was systemic. I changed it. The public incident report cost us 1 small customer and earned the anger of 2 investors who believed we were volunteering damaging information. It also prompted a state benefits agency to contact us. We have the same problem. Its technology director said. Our staff can look up too much. Show us what you build after the failure. That sentence became Northstar's second major contract. Truth did not guarantee mercy. It changed which people were willing to trust us. While we rebuilt the system, Julian's family faced a different kind of audit. Rosa's procedure had succeeded. But the hospital billed her for an out-of-network anesthesiologist she had not selected. The amount was $19,000. In the first life, Julian would have taken a private loan, hidden it, and worked nights at Voss Urban until debt became dependence. This time he called me. "I need help," he said. The specificity of the word stopped me in the hallway outside a customer meeting. What kind? Advice, not money. Maya once mentioned surprise billing appeals. Can she point me to someone licensed in Illinois or Pennsylvania? Yes, I'll ask her. And I need you to listen for 5 minutes before you solve anything. I sat on the floor beside the conference room door. Go. He told me he was afraid the debt would derail his licensure hours. He was angry at Rosa for trying to pay with a credit card. He was ashamed that a number on a bill could make him feel 12 years old again. Watching his mother choose which utility to keep on, I listened. When he finished, I asked, "Advice now?" "Yes." Maya connected him with a patient advocate and an attorney who handled billing disputes. Julian requested the itemized record, filed an internal appeal, and submitted a complaint under state protections. The hospital reduced the bill to the in-network amount, and its hardship program covered most of the remainder. The process took 11 weeks. There was no dramatic phone call erasing the debt. There were forms, hold music, certified letters, and a spreadsheet. Rosa color-coded with sugar packets. Julian handled it. I helped only when asked. That restraint was harder than writing a check. Our monthly dates continued. Sometimes we discussed whether to become exclusive again. Sometimes we avoided the question because the evening was good and naming the future felt like pressure. In August 2014, Julian finished the Calder Fellowship and accepted a position with a non-profit design firm in Pittsburgh rather than Voss Urban's higher-paying offer. Camille called him personally. "You're walking away from national work," she said, loud enough that I heard through the car speaker. "I'm choosing work I want. You're choosing proximity to my mother and to projects I care about, and Nora." Julian glanced at me before answering. "Nora is part of my life. She is not the explanation for every decision I make." Camille laughed. "You used to be more ambitious." "No, I used to let other people define ambition by the size of the building." He ended the call. I had spent years imagining that if Julian ever rejected Camille, I would feel victorious. What I felt instead was respect. He had not chosen me over a career. He had chosen his own career over her definition of success. "Are you disappointed about the salary?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "And relieved. Both can be true." North Star's state benefits pilot launched the following year. The system allowed caseworkers to verify eligibility facts without downloading full tax and employment files. An independent audit found no critical vulnerabilities. We secured a $4 million Series A led by a fund that accepted our public benefit commitments in standard governance terms. At the closing dinner, an investor toasted Nora Bennett's uncompromising vision. I corrected him. "North Star's vision has been compromised many times," I said. "That is how it improved. The principle is user control. The implementation belongs to the team." Maya looked at me over her glass, surprised and pleased. After dinner, Julian and I walked across the Roberto Clemente Bridge. City lights trembled on the river. He had attended as my guest, wearing the same dark suit he used for client presentations. "You were good in there," he said. "I talked too long." "You always talk too long when you're nervous." I was not nervous. "You reorganized the silverware by size." I laughed. At the center of the bridge, he stopped. "I want to be with you again," he said. "Exclusively, not as a trial date once a month." I had imagined this moment in dozens of forms. None included buses rattling behind us or a cyclist ringing his bell because we were blocking the lane. Julian moved us to the side. "I want that too," I said. "What are you afraid of?" The question was part of our new practice before commitment. Name the fear. That success will make me controlling. That your fear of being a burden will make you secretive. That we will become good at discussing rules and still fail at tenderness. He nodded. "I'm afraid your company will become the third person in every room. I'm afraid I'll measure myself against your money. I'm afraid if I disappoint you, you'll look calm and leave emotionally before I know there's a problem." The fears were not romantic. The honesty was. "What do we do with them?" I asked. "Notice them early, get help before a courthouse." The word struck so close to the future that I could not breathe for a second. Julian saw my face. "What?" "Nothing I can explain yet." Pain flickered across his expression, but he did not press. "I need you to believe I'm trying to get there," I said. "I believe you're trying." It was not unconditional trust, it was trust matched to available evidence. We became a couple again on the bridge, without a ring or a promise that nothing would break. Julian kissed me while the city moved around us. And I understood that reconciliation was not returning to where we had been. It was building a place that had not existed before. 3 months later, North Star State Pilot detected an attempted misuse and blocked it before any credential was disclosed. Maya printed the alert and taped it beside our first failure report. Systems learn, she said. So do people, I answered. She capped her red pen, slower, much slower, but not too late. The first months after we reunited were deliberately ordinary. Julian kept his apartment. I kept mine. We chose one evening each week when neither of us discussed contracts, deadlines, design reviews, or medical bills unless something truly could not wait. At first, the rule felt artificial. Then it revealed how often we had used work as a safe language when intimacy felt uncertain. One Thursday, we cooked pasta in his narrow kitchen. The sauce burned because we became distracted arguing about whether an abandoned department store should become housing or a public library. When the smoke alarm sounded, Julian opened the window and I waved a dish towel beneath the detector. This is your adaptive reuse expertise, I asked. This building lacks adequate ventilation. You designed the renovation. I did not design the stove. We ate the unburned half from mismatched bowls on the floor. Nothing about the evening advanced North Star. Nothing improved Julian's portfolio. It still felt important. Later, he gave me a key to his apartment. This is not an invitation to manage my refrigerator, he said. Your refrigerator is a public health concern. It is an invitation to enter without proving you have a useful reason. The joke left me. I closed my fingers around the key. I don't know how to do that naturally. Practice. A week later, I arrived with no groceries, no documents, and no solution to anything. Julian opened the door, looked at my empty hands, and smiled as if I had brought him something rare. The gesture did not heal the first marriage I remembered. That life remained inside me, with its closed doors and unanswered calls, but the key represented a different rule. I was welcome before I was needed. For someone who had built her identity around usefulness, that was more frightening than any financing round. I stepped inside anyway. Paige returned to my life wearing white and standing beneath a ClearPass logo. It was September 2018 at a technology conference in Washington, D.C. North Star had grown to 120 employees and served licensing boards, universities, hospital networks, and public benefits agencies in 11 states. We had closed a Series B at a $400 million valuation. My shares were worth more on paper than I could emotionally understand, though they could not pay for lunch unless someone bought them. I was scheduled to speak about consent-based verification. Paige's keynote came immediately before mine. She walked onto the stage as if the last 8 years had been a rehearsal for that entrance. Identity is not a document, she told the audience. It is a relationship between the person who knows, the person who proves, and the person who asks. The sentence was not identical to my blue page. It was close enough that my body recognized the theft before my mind completed the comparison. Behind Paige, a slide displayed 3 boxes: person, issuer, verifier. The arrangement was common now. The language was not. Paige described ClearPass as the realization of an idea she had developed in a Westbridge dorm room in 2010. She showed a photograph of a pale blue page, cropped so the handwriting could not be read. The audience applauded. Maya sat beside me in the front row. Her red pen stopped moving. Do not react in public, she whispered. I know. You are gripping the chair hard enough to leave evidence. I released it. In the first life, this was where Paige's story had become history. I had sat in audiences and heard her turn our conversations into her origin myth. I had remained silent because challenging her would have threatened my job, my options, and the fragile belief that I still belonged inside the company. Now I had a company of my own, an archive and witnesses. I also had a responsibility not to confuse emotional certainty with a legal claim. Paige found me backstage after her speech. Nora, she smiled. It's been a long time, 8 years. You look good. So do you. Maya stood at my shoulder. Paige glanced at her, still documenting everything. Only what matters, Maya said. Paige laughed. Then you must be exhausted. I looked at the blue page photograph on the monitor behind her. Whose page did you show? Mine. May I see the uncropped image? Her smile tightened. You don't own the concept of digital credentials. I didn't say I did. I asked whose handwriting is on the page. You always wanted a clean villain? No, I wanted a clean record. A stage manager called my name. Paige stepped closer. You should be careful, she said softly. North Star's story about a single visionary founder is useful to investors. It is also incomplete. Our public materials credit the team and Professor Ortiz, not me. You left before the prototype award and were paid for your assigned interview work. After you pushed me out, you resigned in writing." Her eyes hardened. "Maybe we remember it differently. That is why records exist." I walked onto the stage with my pulse still racing. The moderator expected a polished lecture. I changed my opening. "Origin stories are dangerous," I said. "They make years of collective work look inevitable and turn complicated ownership into a photograph of one page. A page can begin a direction. It cannot build a secure system, negotiate a public contract, or earn trust after failure. Those things belong to teams." I did not name Page, I did not display our evidence, I delivered the planned talk and answered questions about revocation, selective disclosure, and public accountability. By evening, ClearPass posted a press release announcing a federal contractor partnership. The release called Page the original architect of portable credentials. Maya opened a legal hold. We preserved the conference video, ClearPass marketing, Page's 2010 departure message, her private deck photograph, the contributor agreement, university archive receipt, source control history, and every version of the original Page. We retained outside counsel specializing in trade secrets and inventorship disputes. Counsel gave me an answer I did not enjoy. "Your note is strong evidence of early conception." Attorney Lena Brooks said, "It does not give you ownership of an industry. If ClearPass independently built different code and patents, they may be entitled to operate. The legal issue is whether Page falsely claims ownership of your specific work, used confidential materials, or is named as inventor on claims she did not conceive. I know what she did. Then discovery must prove it." Northstar sent a narrowly written preservation and correction demand. We did not ask ClearPass to shut down, we asked Page to stop displaying my page as hers and to identify any Northstar confidential material in ClearPass systems. Her lawyers responded with a threat. They claimed Page had co-created the 2010 concept, that my project records were self-serving, and that Northstar had benefited from work she contributed before being excluded. They attached a scanned document titled Trustport Concept Notes, dated October 12, 2010, 2 days before my archived page. The scan appeared to show Page's name and my 3-box diagram. For 1 terrible hour, I doubted my own memory. Rebirth had taught me that memory could be vivid and still incomplete. What if Page had proposed part of the model in the first timeline? What if I had turned hurt into certainty? What if my obsession with documentation had created a record that looked cleaner than the actual collaboration? Maya read the scan beside me. "The typeface in the footer did not ship with that scanner software until 2012, she said. "You know that?" "No, I suspect it. We hire a forensic examiner." The examiner found more. The PDF metadata had been altered. Compression artifacts showed that the date line had been inserted after scanning. A faint layer beneath Page's name contained different pixels. The image likely originated from a later document. It was not enough to prove whose page she had used. It was enough to question hers. Then Julian found something I had missed. He was reviewing old external drives because his Pittsburgh firm had hired Northstar to verify apprenticeship credentials for a workforce housing project. One drive contained photographs from Westbridge in 2010, including the Innovation Office hallway. In one image, I stood beside Professor Ortiz holding the original blue page. A wall clock showed 4:36. The day's campus newspaper was tucked under my arm. Julian had taken the photograph as a joke because I had insisted on redundant proof. The full-resolution file retained the camera's original creation data and had been backed up to his university account that evening. He called me from his office. "I found something," he said. When I saw the photograph, my knees weakened. "You kept this?" "I keep everything." I thought of the old romantic note in his wallet on our divorce day. "Yes," I said, "you do." Julian heard something in my voice. "Nora, what aren't you telling me?" The question had waited 8 years. I had told myself that revealing Rebirth would burden him with grief for a marriage he had never lived. I had also used that reasoning to protect my control over the truth. "I will tell you," I said. "Not over the phone after this conference." "Is it about Page?" "Partly." "Is it about us?" "Yes." He was silent. "Please don't ask me to wait another year," he said. "I won't." ClearPass did not correct its origin story. Instead, Page gave an interview suggesting that well-funded competitors were trying to erase a woman founder's early work. The irony was precise enough to feel designed online. Strangers divided into teams. Some called me a corporate bully. Others found Northstar's public archive and accused Page of fraud. Employees worried that the dispute would distract from customers. Investors asked whether litigation could block our patents. At an all-hands meeting, I told the company exactly what we knew and what we did not. We have evidence that I wrote the archived page, I said. We do not own general concepts. We will defend our code, patents, and truthful history. We will not attack ClearPass employees or customers. No one here should. Contact Page directly. Afterward, Luis approached me. Do you want us to call you the inventor in the product history? No, list the specific claims and contributors. He smiled. That answer is why I'm still here. The company did not collapse, customers continued using the system, the dispute remained dangerous, but it no longer controlled the whole story. That night, Julian arrived at my hotel carrying the old external drive in a padded case. He set it on the table between us. Evidence. He said, yes. Now the truth. I looked at the man I had loved in 2 different lives and understood that documentation could protect ownership, but it could not protect intimacy from a truth deliberately withheld. For that, I had only my word. Before I spoke, I asked Julian one question. If the truth changes how you see me, will you stay long enough to tell me directly? His face tightened. That depends on the truth. It was not the reassurance I wanted. It was the honest answer I had spent a lifetime claiming to value. I can promise not to disappear, he added. I can't promise the same feeling afterward. That's fair. He sat in the armchair by the window. Washington traffic moved below us, red lights threading through the dark. On the desk, the external drive, my laptop, and the copied blue page looked like exhibits prepared for a trial. I moved them aside. This is not a business presentation, I said, mostly to remind myself. Julian watched me remove my shoes and sit on the carpet because I could not make the words come from a formal chair. He joined me without comment. For years, I had feared that telling him would make our second life less real. He might see every kiss as a correction, every warning as manipulation, every choice as something I had engineered with information he lacked. That fear was justified. Concealment had not made the imbalance disappear. It had only denied him the right to respond to it. I knew your mother would have heart trouble. I began. I knew Camille would try to make herself necessary to you. I knew Paige would take my work. I knew because all of it happened before. Julian did not interrupt. Not before 2010, I said. Before I woke up in the library. His eyes remained on mine, and for the first time since rebirth, I let the entire lost future stand between us without trying to control what it meant. Then I told him about the courthouse. In detail, I told Julian that we had married in June 2013 in the first life, 1 week after my graduation and 1 month after he turned down the Calder Fellowship. I told him we had rented an apartment above a bakery, where the pipes knocked every morning and the bedroom smelled like cinnamon before sunrise. We bought the blue ceramic bowls at a street fair because we could afford 2 or nothing. He built my first desk from a salvaged door. I paid the electricity bill late 3 months in a row because I kept forgetting the account was not automatic. For a while, we were happy in ways that did not need improvement. Then I joined ClearPass. Paige called it reconciliation. She offered me a product role and options that sounded generous because I did not understand the cap table. I worked nights translating my old architecture into systems ClearPass could sell. When I asked about founder credit, Paige said investors distrusted complicated origin stories. I accepted private praise in place of public truth. Julian built schools and clinics at a small Pittsburgh firm. He earned less than I did and pretended it did not matter. When Rose's heart condition worsened, he borrowed money without telling me. Camille recruited him to Voss Urban with a salary large enough to cover the debt. I thought you took the job because of her, I said. Julian sat very still on the hotel carpet. In that life, did I love her? No. The answer came without hesitation. How do you know? I didn't then. I know now because I saw the full pattern. And because you told me at the courthouse. His face changed at the word. I described the magazine photographs, the late project nights, and Camille's carefully worded comments. I described the message she sent me after a gala. Julian is exhausted from carrying a marriage that treats his work like a hobby. I never asked whether you said it, I admitted. I believed her because I had already begun to think you resented me. What did she tell me? I found out later that she showed you part of an email where I told Maya I was tired of supporting a dream that refused to become practical. I was talking about a ClearPass project. Camille let you think I meant your work? Julian pressed both hands against his face. I wanted to touch him. I waited. Did we ever talk about it? He asked. Not directly. We argued around it for years. I told him about the promotion I accepted without discussing the travel, the house he renovated while I answered emails from the kitchen. The fertility appointments we postponed until postponement became its own decision. The night ClearPass pushed me out and he called from Chicago. The fact that I did not answer, why, Because Camille was in the presentation photographs, because I wanted you to notice something was wrong without making myself vulnerable enough to say it. His eyes closed. And the divorce? I filed after 2 years of sleeping beside each other like polite strangers. You did not fight it. I thought that proved you wanted out. What did it prove? That you believed. Fighting would humiliate you and pressure me. At the courthouse, you said I had asked for the divorce without using the words for 2 years. Julian looked toward the window. That sounds like me. Yes. What was the last thing I said? I told him about the rain, the umbrella with the bent rib, and his confession that he had never learned to be proud of me without fearing I would outgrow him. Then I described the blue romantic note falling from his wallet. Julian's gaze snapped back to mine. What did it say? Meet me under the astronomy dome after your studio review. I choose us. Don't make me say it twice. He stood so abruptly that I flinched. Without speaking, he took his wallet from his jacket, from behind an old insurance card. He removed a pale blue scrap of paper. The note existed in this life too. I had not written it before our first date. I had written it 2 years later, before his final Westbridge studio review. After we had nearly missed each other because I was in a customer meeting. The wording was the same because some impulses survived altered history. Julian unfolded it with shaking hands. I never told you I kept this, he said. No? I have never shown it to anyone. I know. He crossed the room and opened the hotel door. For 1 second terror emptied me. Then he said, I need 10 minutes. I promise not to disappear. I am telling you where I'm going. He walked to the end of the hall and stood by the ice machine. I remained on the floor. The 10 minutes lasted longer than 15 years. When Julian returned, he closed the door and sat in the armchair rather than beside me. I don't know whether I believe time restarted, he said. I believe you know things you could not know. I believe the pain is real. I also believe you made decisions for me using a marriage I never lived. Yes. You watched me around Camille like I was already guilty. Yes. You encouraged me to take the fellowship because you regretted that I declined it, not only because I wanted it now. Yes. You knew my mother might get sick. Yes. Anger roughened his voice. You had years to tell me. I was afraid. So was I. In the life you described, you did not forgive my fear when it became secrecy. The sentence struck cleanly. No, I said, I didn't. He looked down at the note. Do you love me or are you repairing him? This was the question I had avoided asking myself. I loved the man at the courthouse, I said. I grieve him, but you are not a replacement for him. You made different choices. You challenged me earlier. You went to counseling. You built work you chose. I love you for things he never had the chance to become. Julian's eyes filled, though no tears fell. And when you look at me, I see both lives sometimes. That is not fair to you. I'm trying to separate memory from expectation. Trying is not the same as doing it, I know. He asked for 2 days. This time I did not bargain. I returned to Pittsburgh and met with my therapist, whom I had begun seeing after our 2013 break. For the first time, I told her the rebirth story without calling it a metaphor. She did not decide whether it was literally true. She asked what responsibility came with believing it. Consent, I said. Julian could not consent to being guided by information I hid. And what can you do now? Give him the truth and accept his choice. Julian came to my apartment on the 3rd evening. He carried 2 folders. One contained Camille's messages from the fellowship years. The other contained screenshots she had sent him of my comments, each one cropped. I contacted her, he said. I asked for the full threads. Did she send them? No, I found originals in my old email archive and requested copies from 2 project teammates. The context was exactly what you said. His verification did not feel like distrust, it felt like participation. Camille says she was protecting me from someone who would always choose ambition. He continued. I told her not to contact me outside current project channels. Common Ground is withdrawing from the Voss Consortium bid. You may lose the contract. I know. Did you do that for me? For professional reasons, a partner who manipulates private communications is not trustworthy in a public housing consortium. You are part of why I looked. You are not the only reason for the decision. The distinction mattered. Julian set the folders down. I'm angry with you. I know. I also understand why you were afraid. I waited. I don't want to end us, he said. But I will not continue as if. The confession fixed the concealment. What do you need? Couples counseling. Full disclosure when a future memory affects a decision about me. Permission for me to disagree with the meaning you assign to that memory. Yes. And one more thing. What? Stop calling the first marriage a failure as if nothing good happened. I stared at him. We loved each other, he said. Badly at the end maybe, Fearfully, but you came back carrying evidence that it mattered. The grief I had controlled. Since the courthouse finally broke loose, Julian crossed the room then. He sat beside me, not as the man from the first life and not as a stranger to it. I cried against his shoulder for the house we sold, the children we never had, the calls we did not answer, and the version of him who had walked into the rain believing love had arrived too late. Julian did not tell me to be grateful for a second chance. He mourned with me for a life that existed only in my memory. When the tears quieted, he unfolded the note from his wallet and placed it in my hand. I kept it because it reminded me that you once said what you wanted, he said. I stopped doing that. So did I. I traced the crease. What happens now? I asked. We learn the difference between reconciliation and reenactment. It was once again the least romantic answer I had ever loved. Our first counseling session was not tender. Julian asked how many of our choices I had influenced with future knowledge. I brought a written list. The fellowship, Rose's early cardiac evaluation, avoiding one investor I knew would later face fraud charges, refusing a surveillance contract before the public scandal that had taught me its cost, watching page. The counselor asked whether I had influenced Julian's choice to return to Pittsburgh. No, I said. Julian answered at the same time. Maybe. We looked at each other. He explained that my support had made the non-profit offer feel possible, while my history with Camille made Voss Urban feel contaminated. I wanted to insist that his decision remain fully independent. The counselor stopped me. Influence is not ownership, she said. The goal is not to prove that your lives have separate causes. The goal is to make influence visible enough for choice. On the walk home, Julian took my hand. I'm still angry, he said. I'm still sorry. Those can exist with this. He lifted our joined hands slightly. The simplicity of it moved me more than forgiveness would have. Forgiveness sounded complete. This was active, unfinished, and honest. For the first time, I stopped treating reconciliation as a verdict we had to win. It was a practice, and either of us remained free to stop if the practice became another form of harm. North Star's growth accelerated after 2020 for reasons none of us celebrated. Universities closed campuses, licensing offices sent employees home, hospitals needed to verify traveling clinicians without waiting for sealed records. Public agencies had to determine eligibility remotely, while fraud vendors offered invasive tools that collected faces, locations, device histories, and behavioral data far beyond what any single decision required. North Star's narrow approach suddenly looked less cautious and more necessary. We tripled revenue in 18 months. We also declined 2 contracts that would have doubled it again. One proposal came from a federal contractor that wanted continuous identity scoring. Users would not simply prove a license or enrollment status, they would be watched for risk signals across devices. The contractor promised a 9-figure partnership. Our board meeting lasted 7 hours. 2 investors argued that North Star could impose safeguards from inside the project. Maya wrote "Who owns the risk?" across 3 pages. Professor Ortiz said little until the lead investor called the surveillance layer an inevitable market direction. Exploitation is often inevitable when the exploited are absent from the meeting. He said. I voted no. The contract failed. North Star's valuation still rose above $5 billion in the next financing round. On paper, my stake crossed $1 billion. The headlines called me a self-made billionaire. My bank account did not change. Most of the shares were illiquid. Taxes would apply to any sale, and the board controlled transfer restrictions. Still, the number changed the way strangers spoke to me. People laughed too quickly. Invitations multiplied. Journalists searched my college history for evidence that success had been obvious. A streaming producer wanted to film the Blue Note under dramatic lighting. I refused. The note is evidence, not a relic, I said. At home, the valuation changed things more quietly. Julian's firm, Common Ground Studio, had grown into a respected 20-person practice. Its projects converted vacant schools, offices, and motels into housing and community space. He earned well. He employed people. He had won awards. None of that prevented a magazine from introducing him as Billionaire founder Nora Bennett's longtime partner. He read the profile at breakfast and folded it without comment. Hurt? I asked. Yes. Do you want me to request a correction? No, they did not get a fact wrong. They reduced you. That is also true. I reached for his hand. He let me take it. But the hurt did not dissolve. Our counselor had warned us that naming feelings would not always produce immediate closeness. Sometimes truth created a distance that had to be tolerated rather than closed. The more dangerous moment came 6 months later. North Star was negotiating a headquarters lease in Pittsburgh. The proposed site was a vacant department store near a transit hub. I asked Common Ground to submit a design proposal through the formal process. Julian declined. Why? I asked. Conflict of interest. The board approved an independent review. Even if the process is clean, every decision will look personal. Your firm is qualified. So are 6 others. I heard the old fear beneath my frustration if he refused to build something connected to my success. Perhaps he still resented it. You are letting other people's assumptions decide your work, I said. No, I am deciding which complications I want. You built half the ideas in the site brief. As your partner over dinner, not as an unpaid consultant. The accusation was accurate. I had discussed circulation, community rooms, and public space for months, absorbing Julian's thoughts into a project he might never be paid to design. I didn't realize I was doing that. That is the problem. The conversation escalated. I said he was protecting his pride. He said I treated proximity to my company as an opportunity everyone should welcome. I reminded him that I had paid him for the original logo. He asked whether I wanted a receipt for every idea shared in bed. Then I said the sentence that stopped us both. Maybe you'll always need my success to be smaller so you can feel safe. Julian's face emptied. I knew the sentence came from the first marriage. I had carried it across time like a weapon and used it against a man who had spent years proving otherwise. I'm sorry, I said immediately. He stood. I need to leave. Tell me where you're going. My office. I will call tomorrow. He did. We met with our counselor that afternoon. I used a future fear as present evidence, I said. Julian looked at the floor. And I waited until resentment built before telling her the unpaid advice bothered me. The counselor asked what repair required. I proposed that North Star compensate Common Ground for prior site consultation at an independently reviewed rate. Whether or not the firm entered the competition, Julian agreed only if the work product was documented and usable by all bidding firms, preventing favoritism. He still declined to bid. I had to accept that repair did not entitle me to the outcome I preferred. The headquarters contract went to a woman-led architecture firm from Philadelphia. Common Ground won a separate city project converting a courthouse annex into affordable senior housing. Julian's project received no benefit from my company and no shadow from our relationship. That independence made our life together stronger, not weaker. We also stopped pretending shared love required shared property in every category. We bought a house together but kept our businesses separate. We signed a cohabitation agreement and later a prenuptial agreement drafted by independent lawyers. The documents covered equity, debts, inheritance, and what would happen if one of us paused work to provide care. Rosa called the agreement romance with footnotes. It is not a prediction of divorce, Julian told her. I know, it is a prediction that lawyers charge by the hour. She brought sugar packets to the signing meeting anyway. In 2022, Julian proposed beneath the Westbridge Astronomy Dome. There was no crowd. He held no enormous diamond. He gave me a simple ring made by a local jeweler and a folded pale blue note. I choose us, I will say it. More than twice, I laughed and cried at the same time. Then I did something that surprised him. I said, "Not yet." Pain crossed his face, but he waited. "I want to marry you," I continued. "I don't want to use the wedding to declare the work finished. Give us one more year living with the valuation, the publicity, and the truth about the first life." Julian looked up at the dark dome. "In another life, did I propose here?" "No, in our kitchen while the dishwasher leaked." "Was it good?" "It was. Perfect," he smiled. "Then this one can wait." We remained engaged without setting a date. The delay confused everyone except us. Business magazines speculated about commitment issues. Camille, whom we now encountered only through professional channels, sent Julian a message saying, "Some people keep every door open." He showed it to me without being asked, then replied that personal commentary was unwelcome, and archived the exchange with his firm's counsel because Voss Urban remained a consortium. Competitor, no drama followed. Boundaries often looked boring when they worked. The Rail test arrived in 2023. When North Star began preparations for a late-stage financing and employee liquidity program, the process required disclosure of all material intellectual property disputes. ClearPass filed suit 2 weeks before due diligence began. Page claimed co-inventorship, breach of an oral partnership, and misappropriation of confidential business methods. She asked the court for a preliminary injunction restricting North Star from using several credential workflows until ownership could be decided. If granted, the injunction would not destroy the company overnight. It would delay contracts, frighten customers, and likely collapse the financing. Our lawyers gathered in the boardroom. On the table lay the blue note, sealed in archival plastic. After 13 years of building, The company's future had returned to one handwritten page. I looked at Maya. Tell me the worst case. She did. I listened without trying to make it smaller. Then I called Julian. I need help, I said. What kind? Listening tonight, advice tomorrow, and whatever happens, remind me that North Star is not the whole measure of my life. I can do that. For once, I believed him without needing a guarantee. That night, Julian came to my house with takeout and no questions about litigation strategy. We ate at the kitchen island while my phone remained face down in another room. I keep thinking the court will decide whether my life belongs to me, I said. The court can decide rights, he answered. It cannot decide whether you did the work. It can decide whether I'm allowed to keep using it. Yes. I appreciated that he did not offer false certainty. What happens if the injunction is granted? He asked. We appeal if the record supports it, we pause affected workflows, we renegotiate contracts, the financing probably dies, some employees leave. And you? I continue unless the board removes me. He nodded. What are you most afraid of? That page will become the official version again, that the truth will be too complicated for people to care. Julian took the original romantic note from his wallet. He had carried a copy since giving me the proposal note. The fragile first version stayed in our home safe. Official versions are rarely complete, he said. That does not make private truth useless. I built North Star because private truth was not enough. I know. But you are allowed to survive even if the public story remains imperfect. The distinction loosened something in my chest. The next morning, he reviewed no code and offered no legal theories. Instead, he helped me prepare the human side of the crisis. We listed who needed direct communication if the hearing went badly: employees, customers, university partners, Rosa, and the foundation grantees who relied on North Star funding. We agreed that he would not speak to the press unless counsel requested it. He would attend the hearing, but he would not sit at counsel table or become evidence of my character. You don't need to prove I'm lovable, I said. That is fortunate. I did not prepare exhibits. I smiled at North Star. Maya created a litigation committee excluding conflicted directors. The board authorized independent counsel and preserved every relevant device. Employees received instructions not to delete messages, even embarrassing ones. Professor Ortiz surrendered old computers for forensic imaging and complained only that the technicians judged his file organization. The process made the company look less like my creation and more like what it had become, an institution with duties larger than my feelings. For years, I had believed ownership meant no one could take the work away. The lawsuit exposed the limit of that belief. Ownership was not immunity. It was a set of rights that had to be supported, shared, governed, and sometimes defended by people other than me. When I entered the hearing preparation room, the blue note waited beneath clear plastic, but it was surrounded by thousands of pages produced by a team for the first time. That did not make the note feel less important. It made its true importance visible. A preliminary injunction hearing is not a final trial, but it can decide whether a company survives long enough to reach one. Paige's lawyers needed to show, among other things, that she was likely to succeed on the merits and would suffer irreparable harm without immediate relief. Our lawyers needed to demonstrate that her ownership story was unsupported, that much of what she claimed was unprotectable general knowledge, and that stopping North Star systems would harm customers and employees far beyond the dispute. The courtroom was smaller than the one where Julian and I had divorced in the first life. That detail almost broke my concentration. Julian sat in the second row beside Rosa. Maya sat at counsel table with outside counsel because she was North Star's COO and custodian of several records. Professor Ortiz waited to testify. The original blue page rested in an evidence sleeve. Page entered with Graham Voss. ClearPass had struggled after expanding too quickly into behavioral identity scoring. A data broker it used had suffered a breach, and several public customers had paused contracts. Voss Capital financed its litigation and held debt that could convert into control if Page won new funding. Graham's presence explained why Camille had contacted Julian the week before the hearing. She had offered Common Ground a lead role on a city redevelopment program. The fee would have doubled Julian's annual revenue. The condition did not appear in the contract, but Camille stated it plainly over dinner. Public neutrality during the North Star dispute. Julian asked whether neutrality meant declining to attend my hearing. Camille said, "It means protecting your employees from Nora's war." He left before the main course. The next morning, Common Ground withdrew from the Voss redevelopment shortlist and documented the reason to its board. Julian did not make a public announcement. He did not turn the refusal into a romantic gesture. He told his employees the lost opportunity was his responsibility and opened the financial projections so they could plan. 2 senior architects supported the decision, 1 resigned. Choices had costs even when they were right, Paige testified first. She described our dorm room conversations, her interviews, and what she called a verbal partnership. She said I had become obsessed with control. After the innovation contest and used legal documents to force her out before the company had value. Some of it sounded plausible because some of it was true. I had been controlling, she had contributed interviews, we had discussed entering the contest together in loose language. The legal question was not whether I had behaved perfectly, it was whether Paige co-conceived the specific claimed inventions or owned Northstar's later work. Her lawyer displayed the scanned Trustport notes dated October 12, 2010. Paige identified the handwriting as hers on cross-examination. Our attorney asked which device created the file. I don't remember. Where was the original paper? Lost during a move. Why did the document contain a font version released after the date shown? I'm not a forensic expert. Why did the pixel layer beneath your name differ from the rest of the scan? I don't know. Paige's confidence did not collapse. Real hearings rarely offered cinematic confessions, she said. The file had been rescanned and reformatted by an assistant years later. She insisted the underlying content remained hers. Then Professor Ortiz testified. He identified the email he sent at 4:31 p.m. on October 14, 2010. The university archive custodian verified the disclosure receipt and storage record. Julian's original photograph showed me holding the page minutes later. A forensic examiner confirmed that the camera file and university backup had not been modified after creation. Professor Ortiz also refused to exaggerate. Did Ms. Bennett invent digital credentials? Paige's attorney asked. No. Did she invent cryptographic signatures? No. Did she invent selective disclosure? No. So her page contains existing concepts. It contains a specific synthesis, problem definition, and set of design constraints that became the direction of Northstar's early work. Could another person independently reach a similar direction? Yes. The answer made an investor behind me shift nervously. Professor Ortiz continued before counsel could sit. Independent. Development is demonstrated through records of development, that is why engineers document. Maya testified about Paige's contributor agreement, departure, payment, and the project repository. She produced source control logs showing when each workflow entered the system and who wrote it. The patent prosecution records named multiple inventors on specific claims. Paige was not named because no documented contribution from her matched those claims. The strongest evidence came from ClearPass itself. Discovery had produced an internal message page sent to a developer in 2019. After her company had already launched, Northstar solved revocation visibility years ago. Recreate the user-facing history without copying their screens. The original concept was always ours, but their implementation is cleaner. The message did not prove she stole code. It contradicted her claim that ClearPass had fully developed the disputed workflows before Northstar. Another message to Graham Voss discussed using litigation to cloud title before Nora's liquidity round. Paige's lawyer argued that it referred to legitimate ownership uncertainty. The judge asked why ClearPass had waited years to sue. Paige said she had hoped for a private resolution. Our counsel produced Northstar's 2018 letter asking her to identify any confidential materials and correct the Paige attribution. ClearPass had refused to provide details. When I testified, my attorney began with the blue note. What did this page do? She asked. It recorded a direction, I said. It helped recruit a professor and create a pilot later. It helped establish when I wrote that direction. Did it make you a billionaire? A few people smiled. No employees, customers, public partners, investors, and 16 years of work built Northstar. The page started the work and helped protect its truthful history. Paige's attorney approached on cross-examination. You describe Ms. Lowell as a betrayer, don't you? Privately, I have used that word. You expected her to steal from you before she left the project. I was cautious about access. Because you believed you could predict the future. Our counsel objected. The judge asked for relevance. Paige's attorney claimed my unusual certainty affected credibility and treatment of Paige. For one suspended moment, I considered denying everything about rebirth. It had no necessary place in the legal record. My documented actions stood without it. I believed Ms. Lowell might claim work. She did not create, I said. That belief did not determine ownership, the records do. Did you manipulate the record to prepare for a dispute? I documented the project to prevent disputes and to resolve them accurately if they occurred. You created a witness statement from your boyfriend. Julian Reed witnessed the page before we began dating officially. Professor Ortiz independently emailed the same time. The university archived a copy. Mr. Reed has a financial interest in your success. He has no North Star equity. His lifestyle benefits from your wealth. The question was designed to embarrass me and diminish him at once. Julian did not move. We maintained separate businesses and signed financial agreements, I said. More importantly, the photograph's authenticity does not depend on his affection. The judge issued her decision 6 days later. She denied the preliminary injunction. The written opinion did not declare me the sole creator of an industry. It found that ClearPass had not shown a likelihood of proving ownership of North Star's code or patent claims, that its delay weakened the claim of irreparable harm, and that the requested restrictions were too broad. The altered document questions and cloud title message weighed against equitable relief. The underlying lawsuit continued. Our financing did not close immediately. Investors required revised disclosures, an escrow for litigation costs, and additional representations. 2 investors withdrew. A public pension fund and a mission-aligned growth investor replaced them on less aggressive terms. 3 months later, ClearPass agreed to mediation. The settlement required Page to stop displaying the photograph page as hers, correct specific public statements, release ownership claims to North Star's code and patents, and acknowledge her compensated 2010 research contribution. North Star made no payment for ownership. Each side covered most of its own fees. The broader industry remained open to competition. It was not total annihilation, it was better, a precise outcome tied to evidence. Page and I met once during mediation without lawyers in the room. She looked tired rather than defeated. You had everything lined up from the beginning, she said. I had records. You never gave me a chance. I gave you a defined role, credit, and payment. You wanted founder ownership without founder work. Her eyes filled. You always made me feel ordinary. The confession surprised me. I admired you. I said. Your ability to speak to people, to understand what they were afraid to admit. You were not ordinary. You decided my work was the shortest route to proving it. She looked away. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I don't know whether I do. That was the last honest thing we gave each other. Outside the mediation office, Julian waited across the street, not in the lobby space without disappearance. I walked to him. Is it over? He asked. The ownership claims are. And the rest? The rest is history. It doesn't end. It becomes something we stop litigating every day. Julian understood I was speaking about more than Page. He opened the new umbrella we had finally bought. It had no bent ribs. Come home? He asked. I took his hand. Yes. At home, victory looked like unopened mail, cold leftovers, and both of us too tired to celebrate. I changed out of my court clothes and found Julian at the dining table reviewing Common Ground's revised budget. The lost Voss contract had forced his firm to postpone 2 hires. He had reduced his own compensation for 6 months and asked the partners to vote on every cut. He showed me the numbers because we had agreed to disclose material financial stress, not because he wanted rescue. I can invest, I said. No. The refusal was immediate but not angry. Is that pride or governance? I asked. Both. Your investment would create the same conflict we avoided with the headquarters. We have a line of credit and enough signed work. If that changes, I will tell you. I believed him. What help do you want? Dinner tonight. Introductions only if they are ordinary professional referrals and disclosed to the partners. No contracts arranged as favors. Agreed. He closed the spreadsheet. What help do you want? The question should have been easy after years of practice. I want you to tell me the hearing is over, I said. Not legally, in my body. Julian came around the table and held me. It's over for tonight, he said. Tomorrow may have documents. Tonight has no documents. I laughed into his shirt, then began to cry. He held me until the courthouse, the divorce, Page's keynote, and the fear of losing North Star stopped occupying the same moment. The next morning, we returned to work separately. North Star's employees received the settlement summary before the press did. Common Ground announced its delayed hiring plan without mentioning Voss. Neither company used our relationship as marketing. A week later, the university asked whether it could display the blue page in a permanent entrepreneurship exhibit. I agreed on 3 conditions. The caption would name the early team, explain that the page was not a patent, and include the first failed pilot report beside it. Professor Ortiz approved. An origin without a failure is advertising. he said. The exhibit would open the following spring. By then, I knew what I wanted to place next to the original note. North Star's employee liquidity program closed in March 2026. The transaction was not an acquisition and not an initial public offering. A group of long-term investors bought a limited number of shares from early employees and founders while providing new capital to the company. The board approved the buyers, transfer terms, tax planning, and a lockup designed to prevent control from shifting quietly. After taxes, charitable commitments, and diversification, the sale gave me more money than I could spend responsibly in several lifetimes. I retained a large North Star stake based on the transaction price. My remaining holdings and sale proceeds placed my net worth above $1 billion. The number appeared in financial publications before the funds reached my account. Reporters called the blue page the billion-dollar note. I corrected them until I accepted that headlines preferred objects to processes. The note had mattered. It had made me stop surrendering authorship. It had drawn Professor Ortiz into the work. It had survived Page's claim and helped preserve a truthful origin. Without it, North Star might not exist. But the Page had never debugged a certificate failure, negotiated a university license, written a consent screen, answered a patient's complaint, or chosen transparency when silence was cheaper. One note had changed my life because I changed what I did after writing it. On the morning the transaction closed, I went to North Star's headquarters alone. The old department store had become a bright building organized around a central public hall. The Philadelphia architects had kept part of the original terrazzo floor. Community groups used the ground-level rooms without passing through corporate security. Employees worked on the upper floors around quiet courtyards and visible staircases. Julian had influenced the brief, but the building was not his. He loved it anyway. In my office, Maya waited with 2 cups of coffee and her red fountain pen. "You are officially intolerable," she said. "Only officially." She handed me the final closing binder. "Do not read it today. The lawyers have read it. The board has read it. You signed it after independent advice. That sounds irresponsible. It is called governance." Professor Ortiz arrived carrying a grocery receipt from 2010 in a protective sleeve on the back. He had written the result of our first closed pilot: 30 claims, 30 correct, 11 minutes saved. "We should put this in the exhibit," I said. "No," he replied. "This belongs in my kitchen." Luis brought the first failed certificate log. Elaine Foster came from Westbridge with the Innovation Archive receipt. Employees gathered in the hall, but we held no champagne ceremony. North Star's customer systems were live. Support shifts continued. Wealth did not create a holiday for people trying to verify nursing licenses before an evening shift. I spoke for 6 minutes. I thanked the team. I named people whose code, policy, sales work, customer support, and criticism had built the company. I announced that Maya would become chief executive at the end of the year. I would remain executive chair and lead long-term product and public interest strategy. The room went silent before it applauded. Maya stared at me. "You did not tell me the announcement was today. The board approved the succession plan last month. You said we would announce after the liquidity close." "It is after." She uncapped her red pen. "We are revisiting your definition of informed colleagues." I laughed. Fair. Stepping back was not retirement. It was evidence that I no longer needed constant operational control to believe the company belonged partly to me. North Star had grown beyond the frightened young woman who created the first archive folder. That was success, not loss. That afternoon, I drove to Westbridge. The university exhibit occupied a small gallery beside the innovation office. The blue technical note rested beneath glass. Next to it were Professor Ortiz's 6 questions. The first pilot report, pages credited. Interview summary, the incorporation documents, and a screen showing contributor histories across 16 years. The caption read, "A direction recorded by Nora Bennett on October 14, 2010, developed by a documented team, tested through failure, governed through shared responsibility." There was no photograph of me alone. I stood before the case until Julian arrived. He wore a dark suit and carried the old black umbrella with the bent rib. He had saved it in his studio. "You brought the broken one," I said. "It has historical significance. It leaks. So does the astronomy dome." The exhibit opening ended at 7. Our wedding began at 8 under that dome. We had invited 23 people: Rosa, Maya, Professor Ortiz, our counselors and close friends, Julian's partners, my small North Star founding team, and the university archivist who had preserved the first page. No investors attended because they were investors. No reporters were informed. Rain tapped the old metal roof exactly as it had on our first date. Rosa arranged sugar packets beside the cake to represent the years she claimed we had made her wait. Maya corrected the count in red ink. Professor Ortiz brought no receipt because he said, marriage was not a grocery transaction and should not be explained as one. Julian and I had already signed our prenuptial agreement. We had already discussed property, care, work, illness, and what we would do if resentment returned. The vows did not pretend those conversations were unromantic. Julian spoke first. I used to believe love meant never becoming a burden, he said. So I hid every need until it became a wall. I cannot promise I will never be afraid or proud. I promise to make the wall visible while it is still small. I choose you as a whole person, not as proof that I succeeded. My turn came. I used to believe love was safest when I was useful, I said. So I solved, managed, anticipated, and called it care. I cannot promise I will never reach for control. I promise to ask before I carry what belongs to you. I choose you without disappearing inside us. We exchanged rings, no? Lightning struck, no lost timeline folded neatly into the new one. I still remembered the courthouse and the pale line on Julian's ring finger. I still grieved the version of him who had walked away in the rain. Rebirth had not refunded those years. It had made me responsible for what I learned from them. After the ceremony, Julian led me to the bench beneath the telescope. On it lay a pale blue notepad and a pen. The exhibit needs a second note, he said. I sat beside him. What should it say? That is usually the inventor's problem. I thought of the first technical page, written in panic and determination. I thought of the romantic note he had carried through 2 lives. I thought of all the documents that had protected us and all the moments no document could guarantee. Then I wrote, success did not give us back the life we lost. Growth gave us the courage to stop losing the life we had. Under it, Julian added, I choose us. I will keep saying it. We signed both names and dated the page. Do we need a witness? He asked. Probably. Maya appeared behind us with her red pen. Absolutely. She signed the corner. Professor Ortiz added his name beneath hers and complained that the sentence was too abstract to test. Rosa drew a small sugar packet instead of signing. The second note joined the exhibit the next morning, but it remained a copy. The original went into our home safe beside the first romantic note. We did not need the university to own every piece of our history. In the years that followed, North Star expanded slowly into international professional credentials without abandoning its user control rules. Maya ran the company better than I had in several categories and differently in all the useful ones. Professor Ortiz chaired the North Star Public Trust, which funded open standards, patient advocates, and digital access programs. Julian's Common Ground Studio completed Rosa House, an affordable senior housing project built from the courthouse annex. Rosa objected to the name until she learned the residents would receive transparent medical billing support on site. Then she demanded a larger sign. Our shared foundation funded public interest identity systems and adaptive reuse housing, but we kept the organizations separate. We continued counseling after marriage. Some weeks, our truth session lasted 10 minutes. Some weeks, it became an argument that required 2 evenings and an apology with no strategic plan attached. We never became effortless. That was not the goal. One spring morning, years after the wedding, I woke before Julian and found him asleep with a folded note on the bedside table. For a moment, the old fear returned, a document beside a sleeping husband, a life about to change. I opened it. The roof contractor comes at 9. I made coffee. You do not need to solve anything before breakfast. I laughed loudly enough to wake him. What? He asked. Nothing. Accurate word. I looked at the man I had loved, lost, found, and finally learned not to own happiness. I said it was quiet, warm, imperfect, and ours. We did not treat marriage as a deadline for children. In the first life, every postponed conversation about family had accumulated shame until neither of us could speak without feeling accused. In this life, we met with doctors, learned our options, and admitted that desire, biology, timing, and fear did not arrange themselves into a simple plan. We considered adoption. We considered remaining 2 people. We considered both choices. More than once. Eventually, we became long-term mentors through a Westbridge program for students leaving foster care. The first student assigned to us, Tasha Green, rejected every piece of advice Julian offered and accepted every meal Rosa packed. She studied information security, interned at North Star under a manager who did not report to me, and later joined a public defender's technology unit. At her graduation, someone asked whether she was our daughter. Tasha answered before we could. They're my emergency contacts. That's more specific. I loved the answer. Our life did not repair every absence by replacing it. Some rooms remained empty. We learned that an empty room could hold grief without becoming evidence of failure. On our 5th anniversary, Julian and I returned to the courthouse where our first marriage had ended. Though in this timeline no record of that divorce existed, We stood across the street beneath the repaired black umbrella. I told him exactly where he had stood, what he had worn, and how long I watched him walk away. He listened without trying to compete with the man he might have become. "Do you still miss him?" he asked. "Yes." His hand tightened around mine. "I'm glad he loved you enough to keep the note." "So am I." Then we left before the rain stopped, not because the past had released us completely, but because we had learned that moving forward did not require pretending nothing remained behind.